What's up guys, welcome to CodAffection. In this tutorial, we will build MERN Stack project to demonstrate CRUD operations with React, MongoDB and Node.js. This is a complete full stack tutorial for those who would like to learn MERN Stack. I hope you will find this tutorial helpful for your upcoming projects. So please watch till the end of this video tutorial. So without further ado, let's get started with the topic. First of all, inside this project folder, I will create the Node.js Server API with Express Server and MongoDB. And then we can build a client-side app with React to consume the API. First of all, you should install Node.js on your system for both Node.js development and React. So go to this official website nodejs.org, and from the website you can download the latest installation file according to your operating system. I have already installed Node.js on my system. In MERN Stack, we will be using MongoDB for data storage. So you have to install MongoDB on your system. So here is the official website mongodb.com. Then inside softwares, you can see community server. Then click on download MongoDB. From this community server tab here, you can select the appropriate installation file according to your operating system. Once you install MongoDB server, you have to start the server. For that, we have to execute these two commands from command prompts. With this cd command here, we will navigate inside the bin folder from MongoDB installation directory. By default, MongoDB server is installed on my system in this directory. In order to start the server, we have to execute this exe file mongod.exe. It will be there inside this bin folder. Inside this command, we have this command argument db path. Inside this directory, data for collection or database will be physically stored. So we have to execute these two commands whenever we need to start MongoDB server. In order to make this process more easy, we will type these commands in a notepad. Then you can save that as a batch file. Once you type these commands, go to file, then save as. You can specify the name here with the extension BAT for batch file. I have done the same in my desktop here. So in order to start the server, you just need to double click on this batch file. By executing those two commands, it will start the server. As a management tool for MongoDB, we can use this MongoDB Compass community. It will be installed along with latest versions of MongoDB server. So let me open this tool here. So here we have the connection wizard. Since we have installed MongoDB server with default configurations and port number, we don't have to change or provide any of these values. Just click on this connect here. Now let's create a database for this project. Let it be Post Manager DB. As you know, MongoDB is a NoSQL database, while MS SQL, MySQL, PostgreSQL are relational databases. So there are some difference in terminologies. For example, tables in relational database is called as a collection in NoSQL DB. So that is why you can see collection name here. In case of rows in relational database, we call it as records in NoSQL DBs. In case of columns, we will call it as fields in NoSQL DBs. We also have to provide one collection or table name here. So let it be post messages. In this project, we are dealing with post messages. It only contains two informations, post title and post message or description, like we do with blog post. Now let's create the database here. So here is the DB with the collection post messages. Now back to the project folder here. To create Node.js API, let me create a new folder, MERN Stack API. Now in order to create a Node.js project inside this folder, we have to open command prompt from this folder directory. So you can use this shortcut inside this folder path here. Just type cmd, hit enter. So here we have opened the command prompt from the same folder directory here. In order to create a Node.js project, you can do this npm init. Hit enter. Then it will ask few configurations for creating this project. We will stick with default configurations. So I will just hit enter for all of these configurations. To confirm this configuration, just type yes, hit enter. As a result of the command execution, you can see a new file here, package.json here. Now let's install few npm packages for this Node.js project. First of all, we have to install this server for the app, which is Express server. And then we have to install this Mongoose package, which is an ORM for MongoDB. Meaning it really helps us to work with MongoDB from our JavaScript code itself without corresponding native SQL scripts. Finally, we have two more packages, body parser and course. These two packages are middleware packages extensively used for Node.js app development. As you can see here, this package is used to pass the request body in middleware. And with this course package, we can enable course inside the project. We will discuss all of this in detail. So without further ado, let's install these four packages inside this Node.js application here. npm I for install, S for save. First of all, we have Express, then Mongoose, then body parser and course. Hit enter. We have completed with the installation. Now let's open this folder inside VS Code editor. So you can use this shortcut code space period or dot symbol. Hit enter. So here we have the brand new Node.js application open in VS Code editor. Since we already started MongoDB server here, first of all, let's look how to connect the DB inside this Node.js application. For that, I will create a new file db.js here. First of all, we have to import Mongoose with this constant mongoose require mongoose. And from that, we can call the function connect. As a first parameter, we have to pass the URI with the port number from which we have started the MongoDB server. So we can pass that like this, MongoDB :/localhost. Then the port number from which we have started the server. By default, it will be 27017. And then we have to provide the name of the database. We have created this database post manager DB. So I will pass that here. As a second parameter, we can have this callback function with this error parameter. Inside that, we can check whether we have any error or not. If there is no error, we will print this message, MongoDB connection succeeded. If there is any error, we have to print the corresponding error message in console. So, error while connecting MongoDB. Now let's append the error object here. So first of all, we have to convert the JSON object into a string using this function stringify. We can skip the second parameter by passing this undefined. And finally, we can pass to here for the proper indentation to make it readable. This should be enough to connect the MongoDB. Now let's try to run this file db.js with node db.js. Hit enter. As you can see, we have successfully connected to MongoDB. Along with that, you can see these two deprecation warning here. In order to remove this deprecation warning, we can pass an object here. Inside the object, I will pass this use new URL parser. We will set it as true here. Now let me save this. So this will get rid of this deprecation warning here. In order to reflect these updates inside this terminal here, we have to re-execute this command node space db.js. First of all, we have to stop this server using this shortcut Ctrl+C, and then we just need to re-execute this command node space db.js. But it would be really difficult to re-execute this command for each change we make. In order to avoid this situation, we can use this tool Node.js, it will automatically restart the Node.js application when we make a change inside the app. In order to install this package, you can use this command here. I have already installed that in my system. Once you install the package, you can do this nodemon space db.js. That's it. Now we have only one deprecation warning. In order to remove that, we can do this. Use unified topology set as true. At the same time, nodemon will re-execute this command node space db.js. Now let's create the Node.js root JavaScript file here, index.js. For now, let me stop this execution with the shortcut Ctrl+C. Type Y. That's it. Inside this file, we will integrate all of the functions or features inside the application. In order to connect the MongoDB, we have to execute db.js file here. So first of all, let's import that here with require statement. So require, we have db.js. Let's execute that as a first step here. Since this is an API, we have to have the server. For that, we have installed the package express. So let's import that here, require express. In order to work with the server, we can do this var app is equal to express function can be called here. In order to start the server, we can do this app.listen function can be called. As a first parameter, we can pass the port number for this API. Once this connection succeeded, we can execute this callback function console.log server started at 4000. In order to pass incoming request body, we can do this body parser is equal to require body parser. We can configure that inside this use middleware function. Inside this use function, we will configure middleware for express server. We just need to do this JSON function will be called. So all of the request body will be converted into JSON format. Now let's look how it works. So nodemon index.js server started at 4000 and we have successfully connected to MongoDB. Now let's create Mongoose model to work with post message informations like post title and post messages. First of all, I will create the folder models. Inside that, we can have this file post message. Let's import Mongoose here. I will define post message like this. From Mongoose, we can call this model function. As a first parameter, we can pass the name of this model post message. And then inside the second parameter with this object, we can define the model. First of all, we have title, which is of the type string. So type is equal to string. Now let me duplicate this. This is for message. Both of these properties should be of the type string. Finally, we have to export this from this file. Module.exports is equal to an object. Inside that, we can export post message. So here we have registered this model into Mongoose. As per the model configuration here, this model will create a collection post messages as a plural for this model name post message here. So these two properties, title and message, will be a field or a column inside the collection. Now we have to create the methods for get, post, put and delete to implement the CRUD operations. For that, we can create a controller inside this Node.js application. So first of all, I will create this folder controllers. Inside that, we can have this controller post message controller. First of all, we have to import the express server. So express is equal to require express. Now let's create a variable for the router. So router is equal to express.router function can be called. Now let's import the model, Mongoose model that we have created inside this file post message. So we can import the file require Outside this controllers folder, we have a folder models. Inside that we have post messages.js. In order to retrieve the returned model, we can do this. We will use this destructive syntax, post message. First of all, we can create the get method like this. Router.get function can be called. As a first parameter, we can pass the URL for this router. I will be passing that as a / for now. And then we can have this function with request and response. And here is the function body. Inside this method, we have to return all of the records inside this collection post messages. For that, we can make use of the mongoose here. Post message.find function can be called. It will return all of the records inside the collection. Inside that, we can have this callback function with error and return docs or records. If there is no error, we can handle that inside this error clause here. We will just return that inside the response. So we can call the send function from response and we will pass the docs here. If there is any error, we can handle that inside this else block. We will print the messages or error object inside this log. Error while retrieving all records. Now let's concat the error object here. JSON.stringify function can be called. And here is the error object. Let's keep the second parameter and 2 for indentation. So inside this controller, we have created a route for get method for retrieving all of the records. Now let's configure this router for this controller inside this index.js. So we have to export the router that we have created here. Module.exports is equal to router. And then inside this index.js, we can do this post message routes is equal to, let's mention that file here. Inside the folder controllers, we have post message controller. Now in order to configure this route, we just need to do this. App.use function can be called. This server will start from the port number 4000. Into that, we can pass this suffix post messages. All of the requests with this pattern will be handled inside this post message routes. So that's it. As we make changes inside the application, Node.js will restart the server inside this terminal. Now let's try to access this get method inside this browser here. So localhost 4000/post messages. Sorry, here we have an error. Post message is not defined. So it should be inside the controller here. So here is the typo. Save, back to the app, reload this page. That's it. Since we don't have any record inside the collection post messages, it returns an empty array here. Now let's try to create rest of the methods post, put and delete. So router.post function can be called. For this method also, I will pass this / for the URL. And then here we have the callback function with request and response. Inside this callback function, first of all, I will create an object like this new record. Inside this post method, we are going to insert a new record into the collection. So I will create this object new record. So through this request, we have to pass the details for the new record. It should contain these details like title and message for the post. It will be there inside this request body. So we just need to retrieve that into this object like this. Title is equal to request.body.title. And then we have message request.body.message. Now in order to insert this record into the DB, we can do this new record dot save function can be called. It is a function from Mongoose. Inside that, we can have this callback function error and doc. Inside that, we can do the same like we have done inside the get method. So let me copy these two lines Inside this error message, I will pass error while creating new record. Now let's create a put method for update operation. For put operation, we have a small change inside the URL. We have to pass the ID through the URL. It should be mentioned after this colon, like this, colon ID. And then we can have the usual callback function with request and response. Inside the put method, we are going to update an existing record with the given ID here. Since we are receiving the ID through the URL parameter, we have to check whether this ID is already existing inside the collection or not. In order to verify this ID, we can import object ID like this. Object ID is equal to require mongoose. Inside that we have types, and we have to retrieve this object ID. Now we just need to do this if object ID. From that we can call this function is valid, and here we have to pass the URL parameter. We can access that like this, request. Inside that we have this params property, and from that we can access the ID. If this ID is not valid, we will handle that inside the if clause like this. We will return a response like this, response, and we will set the status to 400 not found, and then call the function send. And here we have the message no record with given ID. Now let me concat the ID here. Let's copy paste the ID. Now if this ID is valid, we can go for the update operation. So I will create the same object like we have created here. So let me copy this and pasting here. Let me rename this to updated record. Through this request parameter, we will be passing updated details of title and message. In order to update the corresponding record, we can do this. Post message dot find by ID, and update function can be called. As a first parameter, we can pass the ID. So let me copy paste that here. With this second object here, we have to pass the updated details inside this property. $set is equal to updated record, and then we can have the same callback function. So let me copy this. Error while updating a record. Now finally we have the delete operation. So router dot delete function can be called. For this method also we have the same parameter ID, function with request and response. Here also we have to verify the parameter ID. So let me copy the same if statement from here. If the ID is verified, we can delete corresponding record with the given ID. So post message. From that we can call this function find by ID and remove. As a first parameter, we have to pass the same ID. Let me copy paste this, and then we can have the callback function. I will copy that from here. Error while deleting a record. We have tested this get request inside this web browser here. Let's try remaining post, put and delete method also. For that we can make use of postman here. This tool really helps us to test a RESTful API. First of all, let's try to insert a new record with the post method. Post can be selected here. We have to use the same URL for post request. Inside this request body, we have to pass an object containing details of new post message. So inside this body tab here, select row. From this drop down, select JSON, and let's pass an object like this. First of all, we have title, and then we have to pass message. So I will be passing values for these properties from lorem. So let's search for lorem. Instead of creating a random lorem, I will just copy these explanation from here, and then let's paste that here. Now let's make the request by clicking on the send button here. Sorry, here we have an error. New record.save is not a function. And here we have the post method. Yes, I always make this mistake. We have to pass this inside the function or model constructor like this. New post message. Sorry, here we also misspelled docs. So let's correct that here. We have made the same mistake for rest of the method also, since we have copied that from that callback function. Back to the postman. Now let's make the request again. Boom. So here we have the status 200 OK, and you can see the returned object with the newly created ID from MongoDB. You can see the same if you refresh this collection. Sorry, it is not displaying. You can see what is happened here. It created another collection, post messages in small letters. Here we have the newly inserted record. As per the Mongoose criteria, it will use a collection with plural name of this model. Also, it will be using small letters for the collection name. So that is what happened here. If you still want to use this collection here, you can pass that as a third parameter here, like this, post message. With this third parameter, we can pass a custom name for the collection like this. Let me save this. Let's try this post request again. We have successfully created the object. Let's refresh this collection here. It is inserted into the respective collection. Now let me drop this collection which is created automatically by the Mongoose. Collection name, post messages. That's it. So we will be using this collection post messages inside the DB for these operations. Now let me insert one more record. So let me copy this title and replace that here. Let's copy this para as a message and replace that here. Send the request. We have inserted the collection successfully. So here we have inserted 2 records. You can see the same if you refresh this page here. In my Chrome browser, I have installed this extension JSON formatter. That is why you can see this JSON object with proper indentation. Before moving into React.js development, let's look how to make put and delete request. For that, let me duplicate this tab here. Instead of post, we have to make a put request. Now let's try to update this second post here. Its ID ends with 35. So let me copy this ID from here, and then we can pass that inside the URL like this. Inside the body, let me try to append few asterisk marks at the end of the title, and for message I will append the asterisk marks as a prefix. Send the request. That's it. Here we have the status 200 OK. If you refresh this get request, you can see the same updated values here. But inside this request, you can see the object before update operation. If you want to see the data after the update operation, you have to make a single change inside this update operation here. Along with this object, we have to set this new as true. Save. Back to the postman. Let me append few more asterisk marks here. Send the request. Now inside the response, we have updated object details. Now finally, let's make the delete request. Instead of put, we have delete. We are going to delete the same record. Its ID ends with 35. We don't have to provide the body for delete operation. Now let's make the request. We have the status code 200 OK. So it should be deleted. Deleted object is returned inside the response. Reload the page. So we have completed with Node.js Server API inside the MERN Stack project. Now let's create the React app inside the same folder where we have our Node.js API. For that also we have to open command prompt from the same folder directory. So you can use the same shortcut inside this folder path. Just type cmd, then hit enter. In order to create a React app, we can use the npm package create React app like this. npx create React app, then name of the app, it would be something MERN Stack client. Hit enter. Based on your internet speed, it will take some time to complete this process, so please be patient. We have completed with the app creation here. As a result of that, you can see the new folder with the app name. Now let's navigate inside this folder with the cd command here. Now in order to open this current folder inside VS Code editor, you can do this code space period. First of all, let's run this application. For that, let me open one terminal here. Now we just need to do this npm start. So this is how the fresh React app looks like. As always, first of all, let's discuss the structure of the app that we want to build. For that, let me create a txt file, refworks here. I have already prepared the app structure for this project or the client-side app here. Let me paste that below. So here we have the src folder. You can see the same here also. We have various folders and files to be created inside the folder. For now, let's discuss these three files here. Here we have the root JavaScript file index.js, and here is the parent app component app.js. As a global style sheet, we can have this file index.css. Inside this index.css, you can see that we have various font families assigned to this body selector. Inside this app, we will be using this Google font Roboto. So let me remove other font families from this style sheet here, and then we have to import the Google font. Now let's grab corresponding CSS reference, Google font Roboto. Select this font, and here we have the card. Inside this import tab, we have corresponding import reference. Let me copy this and pasting here. Okay, that's it. Inside this application, we have two main components, post messages and post message form. Inside this parent component, post message, we will list all of the records that we have inserted into the database before. And inside this form component, we will design a form for insert and update operation. It will be rendered as a child component for this list component here. So first of all, let's create these components inside this folder. So let's create the folder components. Inside that, we can have post messages, and then we have the form component post message form. In any React component, we have to import React here. So let's add the corresponding import statement. From React, we have to import React. Now let me copy paste this import statement for the list component here. In this project, we will be using React hook components, unlike our previous tutorials where we have used class-based components. We can have all of the features from class-based components in React hooks. Apart from that, it has additional features like code reusability, etc. We can discuss that later in this tutorial. So let's create the component with React hook. For that, I will be using this snippet stateless functional component. If you want to create a functional component, you can use this snippet React functional component. For class-based components, you can use this snippet RCC. You can have these snippets once you install this extension ES7 React snippets. So let's create the component with this snippet SFC. Component name will be post messages. With this parameter props, from this component we will return this div from post messages. Let's do the same inside this form component also. SFC post message form. Single parameter props. Inside that we will return this div from post message form. Inside the default component app.js, you can see this div which is responsible for the default view of the application here. So first of all, let's get rid of that here. Instead of that, let's add newly created component post messages. Inside this auto suggestion or auto complete list here, you can see the corresponding component post messages with auto import. If you select that, corresponding import statement will be added at the top. Okay, we don't need this logo import anymore, so let me remove that here. Let me save this. Back to the application. So here we have the text from list component. Now first of all, let's look how to retrieve and render all of the records that we have inserted while testing Node.js API with Postman. Before that, I want to install and integrate Redux into this React app for state management. I know most of you are familiar with Redux, even though we can discuss Redux basics for newcomers. In order to work with Redux, we are going to install 3 packages inside the application. So first of all, we have to install Redux. Since Redux is an independent package for state management in client applications, in order to act as an intermediate, we have to install this package React Redux. And here we have the third package, Redux Thunk. We will discuss why we need this package later. Basically, in Redux, we have 3 main components: Redux Store, Action, and Reducer. Inside Redux Store, we will be storing data inside Redux Store state. And basically with Action, we are defining an operation which is to be done on the data that we have saved inside Redux Store. Programmatically, it will be an object like this create action with 2 properties, type and payload. In this example, we will be doing a create operation, and corresponding object to be inserted will be inside this new record, and we have passed that through this payload. In order to execute this operation, we have to call this dispatch with corresponding action like this, and then it will reach up to the reducer. Inside reducer, based on the operation we passed, it will update the data inside Redux Store. Programmatically, it would be a switch statement. Inside each case, we will handle each operations. And from these cases, an updated state object will be returned and it will be replaced inside this Redux Store here. We can access Redux Store data inside React component or UI with the help of intermediate package React Redux. Whenever there is a change inside this Redux data, corresponding changes will be reflected inside the React components. So that's how Redux works with React. Now let's install these 3 packages. npm i for install, s for save, Redux, React Redux, and Redux Thunk. Once you complete with this installation, let's create Redux Store inside this actions folder. So first of all, let me create a folder, actions. Inside that we have a file, store.js. In order to create Redux Store, we have to import few functions from Redux. So here is the import statement from Redux. First of all, we have the function create store. Now let's create and export the store here. Store is equal to, we can call this function create store. Inside that we can pass these parameters. First of all, we have to pass the reducer, which we have not yet created. For now, I will pass this empty object. We have to replace this empty object once we create reducers inside the app. As a second parameter, we have to pass the middleware. Inside this application, as we have mentioned, we will be using Redux Thunk as a middleware for Redux. For now, I will just apply that as a middleware. Why we need this middleware package? So first of all, we have to import this function apply middleware and then compose. Now let's import Redux Thunk here. Now as a second parameter, we can call this function compose. Inside that, we can call the apply middleware function with thunk. So here we have created and exported Redux store. Now let's pass this Redux store into the application. So here is the app component. First of all, we have to import provider component from React Redux. Let's import provider. Now let's enclose that here, provider, and here we have to pass the store that we have created. So let's import the store here, import statement. From this folder actions, we have to import store. Now let's pass that here. Okay, so here we have applied Redux store. Here we are trying to retrieve all of the inserted records. So first of all, let's add an action for retrieving all of the records. So first of all, let's create the actions file post message. So here's the new file, post message.js. First of all, I will show you how I created actions before Redux thunk. As we have mentioned inside the diagram, it would be an object like this. Fetch all is equal to an object with type fetch all, and through the payload we will be passing an array which we have retrieved, and then from React components I will be calling the dispatch function with this action fetch all. Okay, but for any operations of the type get, put, delete and post, we have to make the API request. In most of the case, it would be done inside reducers. Even though we are calling this as an action, there is no action occurs inside this Redux action. So by applying this middleware Redux thunk, we can make asynchronous requests inside Redux actions, and then we can have a clean reducer just to update the Redux state. So that is why we have applied Redux thunk as a middleware here. First of all, let me remove all of these codes here. First of all, I will create action types here. Export constant action types. Here we will have constant string properties for each operations. So first of all, we have create is equal to create. Since we have same property name and value here, we can make use of the VS Code multi-cursor feature. I will just do this, colon, then single quotes, and let's add multiple cursor here and here by just holding Alt. Now we have update, then we have delete, and finally we have fetch all. Now let's create and export the action for fetch all operation. Fetch all is equal to a function without any parameter. From this function, another function will be returned like this with this single parameter dispatch. So this is the basic structure of an action with Redux thunk. In most of the case, you will see this simplified version like this. You can have this short syntax when a function returns another function like this. So this is the outer function. Inside that, a function is returned with this parameter dispatch. So here we are going to define the body of inner function. Now let's call the dispatch function here. Inside that we have to pass an action. Type is equal to action types dot fetch all can be passed here, and inside this payload property we should have an array containing all of the records from the DB. For now I will just pass this empty array. We have to fetch all of the records with the get request here. We can do that in a bit. For now we can keep this empty array here. Once we invoke this dispatch function, it will reach up to the reducer. So let's create the reducer as per the structure here. Inside reducers folder, we will have this file post message. So let me create the folder reducers. Inside that we have post message. Basically, reducer is a function with switch statement. So let's create and export the reducer here. Export constant post message is equal to a function with two parameters, state and action. And here is the function body. The value of this action parameter will be same as that of the object that we have passed inside the dispatch here. Inside this state parameter, we have to define data to be saved inside Redux store. For this application, we just need an array to store all of the post messages. So here it is, constant initial state, an object. Inside that we can have this array list. I will initialize that with an empty array, and we can pass that here, initial state. Inside Redux store, this array list will be stored like this: post message, which is the function reducer, and then we can access the list here. Now we have to import the action types that we have created here. Okay, so import from actions folder, we have the file post messages. From that we have to import action type constant object. Now inside this function, let's have a switch statement like this. Key for this switch will be the operation that we have passed inside this property type. So we can do this action dot type. If the operation is fetch all, we can handle that inside this case here. So action types dot fetch all. From this reducer, we just need to return an object with updated values like this. First of all, we will keep existing values from the state as it is, and we just need to update the array list. In this case, there is no other data stored other than this list, so we don't have to do this. In most of the case, there will be other data other than this array. We use this syntax to keep other informations as it is without any change. So inside the payload property, we have passed list of the records. We have to assign that inside the list array here. We will use this split operator. Inside action payload, we have the list of records. So this is what we have inside reducer for fetch all operation. Inside this default case, we just need to return the state as it is. So we can do this return state. Now while creating Redux store inside this file store.js, we have passed an empty object here. We have to replace this with the reducer that we have created here. Here we only have one reducer post message. In a normal application, we will have one reducer for each entities. In that case, we will combine all of those reducers into one, and then we will pass that as a first parameter to this function create store. In order to combine all of those reducers, we will create a file. I have already mentioned that inside the app structure, which is index.js. You can see the same inside the app structure, index.js, to combine all of the reducers. Now let's import corresponding function here. From Redux, we have to import this function combine reducers. Now let's import the reducer post message here. Post message. From that we have to import post message. Now let's create a constant to export constant reducers, combine reducers. Inside that we will have an object like this, post message. Now let's pass these reducers inside this function create store here. So first of all, let's add corresponding import statement from reducers folder. We don't have to mention this index.js. By default it will look for the file index.js. Okay, and then from that we have to import reducers. Now let's pass that here, reducers. We were trying to retrieve all of the records that we have inserted into the DB. For that we have created reducer for fetch all operation here, and we also have created the action creator for fetch all operation. And finally, we just need to make a get request to retrieve records inside this collection here. In order to handle such API requests, I'm going to make a new file api.js, which is mentioned inside the app structure here. So let's create the file api.js. In order to make HTTP requests from this React.js application, I'm going to use the npm package Axios. So let's install that here. npm i4 install s4 save Axios. Hit enter. So we have completed with Axios installation. Now let's import that here. Axios, we will import it as Axios here. It is always better to handle API requests in a separate file like this. If there is any change in server side, we just need to update this file api.js. From this file, we just need to return an object like this with few functions. Export default. Inside that, we will have functions for each entities. So post message with a single parameter URL, and inside that we will return another object. It will contain functions for each common operations. For example, fetch all is equal to a function without any parameter, and we can make the get request like this axios.get. Inside that we can pass the URL. Now we can pass the value for this URL as a default value for this function here. For that, so first of all, I will define a constant for base URL. Base URL is equal to, it will be localhost 4000. So let me copy this and pasting here. Now for this entity post message, we can provide the default URL like this base URL. Now into this base URL, we just need to concat the suffix post message. So let me copy that from here. Now let's define remaining functions. Fetch by ID, a function with a single parameter ID. Here also we have to make a get request axios.get. We just need to append the URL with ID. And then let's make the post request for create operation. So create is equal to, we have a single parameter new record, and let's make the post request URL and then new record object. Inside this parameter new record, we will have the values of the new entity. And let's create the function update for put operation, which is used for the update operation. So we have to pass the ID and update a record. So axios dot put function can be called as a first parameter. Now into this URL we have to append the ID also, and then we have to pass the updater record object. And finally let's make the delete request. So delete, it's a function with single parameter ID. Axios.delete function can be called URL the ID. That's all. So here we have defined functions for common HTTP requests like get, put, post and delete. Now let's look how we can make use of this file api.js inside this action creators here. First of all, we have to import the file api.js here. So import statement for api.js file, we will import that as API here. Now we just need to retrieve all of the records from this collection post messages. For that, we can make this request fetch all inside this function post message. So we can do this. So from this file API, we have to call the function post message. We will call this function, and inside that we have this function fetch all. Okay, we don't have any parameter for the function fetch all here. Here we have the success function callback then, and the error function catch. Inside the catch function we can do this. We just need to log the error object. Inside this success function we can have a callback function with the parameter response. Now inside this response parameter we will have a data object or property containing all of the records that we have returned from this collection. So we can do this. I will just move this dispatch function into this success callback here, and we can pass that array into the payload here, data. So here we have completed with action creator for fetch all operation. Now where do we call this function fetch all? That we can do inside this component post messages here. But there is a problem. These actions and creators and Redux store properties, this list, are inside the Redux package. In order to access that inside this React component, we have to map those actions or the Redux data into this component. For that, we can use intermediate package installed React Redux. So import statement from React Redux, we have to import the function connect, and then we just need to call that here connect, and we will pass the component in another pair of brackets like this. I hope you understood the syntax here. This connect function will return a function, and to that return function we are passing this post message component as a parameter. Now for this connect function we have two parameters. One is to map all of these action creators, and one is to map all of these data that we have stored inside Redux store. For example, we have to map this list into this component here. So first of all, let's map action creators here, constant map action to props. Actually it is an object like this. Now let's map this function fetch all into this component here. So fetch all post messages is equal to, now we have to import these actions here. So first of all, I will add the import statement. So actions folder, inside that we have this file post message. We will import all of them as actions, and now let's do this. Actions dot fetch all function is mapped into this key fetch all post messages. And now in order to access this function, we just need to do this props dot fetch all post message. Okay, that's it. Now we just need to pass this function here, map action to props. Now we also need to map this Redux store state parameter list. For that we will define another function like this, constant map state to props. It is a function with single parameter state, and this state represents the Redux store state. It contains all of the properties like we have passed here. It is a function just to return an object, so we can use this brackets. Inside that we have the object to be returned. So inside that we can use this key here, post message list is equal to state dot name of the reducer, which is post message dot list. As we have mentioned, this list array will be stored inside a key with this reducer name post message. So we have map list array into this component also. Now let's pass that as a first parameter here. This will map state to props, and second parameter will map action to props. Now let's call this function fetch all to retrieve all of these records inside the collection here. If we were using class-based components here, we will do that inside component did mount lifecycle event. In case of React hooks, we don't have lifecycle hooks. Instead of that, we can use the function useEffect from React hooks. Actually, it is introduced for a different purpose. Let me show you how you can make use of the function useEffect here. So first of all, let's import that here, useEffect. Along with that, let's import this function useState. This function useState is used for defining component state properties like this. First of all, we will have a tuple, and here is the component state property x. Along with that, we can have this function setX, which is the function to update the value for this property x. And we just need to initialize this with the function called useState. If you want to initialize this x property with 0, we just need to pass that value here 0. In various contexts, if you want to update the value for this component state property x, you can do this set x with the new value. And we can use this function useEffect like this. useEffect, first of all, we will have a callback function like this. As a second parameter, we can have this array. Inside that, we can specify this x state property. Whenever the value inside this x property changes, this callback function will be invoked. So inside this callback function, you can do whatever you want when the value of this x property changes. So here is the trick. If you pass an empty array here, it is similar to component did mount in class-based components. So when this component is completely rendered, we have to call this fetch function here. So we can call that from this component parameter props.fetch all post messages. So this action creator will be invoked when this component is completely rendered. During that time, I just want to print the response that we have received through this get request here. For that, we can do this console.log response. Now let me save this back to the application here. Now let's look whether that response is printed inside the console window here. Unfortunately, here we have an error. It says HTTP request at Node.js URL from origin React URL has been blocked by course policy. So here we try to make a get request to this URL post messages. Here we have this error because of the Node.js security feature. Meaning this Node.js API will block requests from another application which is hosted in a different domain or different port number. Here we have started this Node.js from this port number 4000 and that of React is 3000. So that is why we have this error here. Now we have to enable course inside this Node.js API for this React application, by which we will allow requests from this port number inside this Node.js API here. For that, inside Node.js API, we have already installed this package course. We just need to configure this course package inside index.js here. For that, we can do this constant course is equal to require. Now let's mention that package course here. Now we can configure that inside the middleware function use. We just need to call the function course. Inside that, we can have this object with this property origin. Inside that, we have to provide the URL for React.js application. So I will copy that from here and pasting here. Make sure to remove the / at the end. Now let me save this, reload this page. We have made the get request successfully. As a result of that, it prints this response here. Inside this data property, you can see an array with an array of post messages. So that is why we have passed response.data inside this action here. Once this request is successful, this dispatch function will be invoked and it will reach up to the reducer here. Inside this case, for fetch or operation, here we will replace this empty array with the data that we have received through fetch or operation. Currently inside Redux store, this list will be updated with the data that we have shown here. If you want to see that, you just need to install the Chrome extension Redux Dev Tool. I have already installed that in my system. So here is the extension Redux Dev Tool. Once you install this, go to this website mentioned under this additional information here. It will be a GitHub page where you can copy this line under this basic store subheading. Let's copy this line in green background and we just need to pass that for this create store function that we have done inside this file store.js. So let me paste the line here. Back to the application, reload this page. Once you install this extension, you can see this logo here. If you click on that, you can see the data from Redux store. So here we have the array that we have updated. For now, we only have one post message with title and message. Okay, that's it. For now, I will just comment this line here. If you want to see the data, you can use this line here. So far, we have retrieved and stored list of post messages. Now I want to display that inside this application here. Before that, we have to install Material UI inside this application, which is the popular React UI framework. So you can go to this official website materialui.com. Now let's install this package. npm i4 install s for save material UI /core. Along with that, we have to install the package for icons. So material UI /icons, hit enter. So here we have completed with the installation. Now let's start designing the app with Material UI. First of all, inside app component here, we have to use Material UI container. We have to enclose all of the components inside Material UI container. So let's do that here, container. Now let's add corresponding import statement, container. This container defines how much space do we want to use from user device. Now let's enclose this list component with this container. With this property max width, we can define how much width we want to use from the user device. In order to utilize maximum width, we can select LG, and for small we can select SM. For extra small you can select XS. I will select LG. Now let me add a navbar for this application. For that, we have to use this component, Material UI component app bar. You can see detailed documentation here. For now, we can do this app bar. Inside autocomplete or auto suggestion, you can see the same with auto import. If you select that, corresponding component will be added at the top. So I will set the position as static here. Then I will set the color as inherit. Inside this app bar, I just want to show an h2 header with application name. For that, we have to use this component typography. We want to show an element similar to h2, so I will set variant as h2. Now I will align the text to center, so align is equal to center. Now inside this element, I just want to show the application name. It would be something post box. Now let me save this. Back to the app. Boom. So here we have the app bar with the application title post box. Just beneath that, I want to apply Material UI grid system like we do with Bootstrap. That we can do inside this list component here. Let me get rid of this default div from the component. Now we can do this grid. This component grid is like a container, so we just need to mark that with this attribute container here. Inside that, we need two columns, so we will do this grid. This is a column, so we can mark that with this item attribute. In total, we have 12 columns. I will apply 5 of them here. Now let me copy this and pasting below. And for this column, I will apply rest of the 7 columns. Inside this first column here, I want to show the form component that we have created here. So let's add that here, post message form. And inside the second column, I want to show a list of posts. So I will just show this list of posts. Back to the app. So that's it. Inside the first column, we have the default div from the form component. And inside the second column, we have to show a list of post messages. Before that, I want to enclose all of these grid items inside Material UI component paper. It will give a proper border for all of these cells. So here is the component paper from Material UI. Now let's move this here. Now let's do the same for this second column here. Sorry, import statement is not added. In some case, you have to do that manually. Paper. Back to the application. Now these columns has a border, but we have to customize that with proper CSS margin and padding. So let's look how to customize Material UI component. For that, we will be using this function with styles. And then outside this list component, I will define this constant styles is equal to a function with single parameter theme. Inside this function, we will just return an object, so we can use this syntax. I will define a CSS class to customize paper component. So I will name it as paper. Inside an object, we can specify the custom CSS. First of all, we have to apply the margin. Here we can define CSS rules like we do in style sheet, but there are some difference. If you want to set margin left like this, it is not permissible because we are defining custom CSS inside the JavaScript code. So instead of this, just remove this hyphen or dash, and then the letter after dash will be uppercased. For now, we just need to set this margin. Of course, we can set that with px unit, but I'm going to use this parameter theme here. So we can do this. Theme dot spacing function can be called, and inside that I will pass this 3. So this is how it works. By default, theme dot spacing 1 is equal to 8 pixel. So spacing 3 is equal to 3 into 8, it will be 24 pixel. And then we have to set the padding, theme dot spacing 2. So here we have defined a class paper. Now in order to access this class inside this component here, we have to call this function with styles after calling this connect function here. So we will call the function with styles here. Into this function, we can pass this constant styles, and then we will pass the component here. Now in order to access this class inside this component, we will just do this props dot classes. Inside this classes property, we will have this class paper. In order to avoid this long reference inside the component, in most of the case we will be doing this. We will use this destructive syntax. First of all, we will have this property classes, and rest of them will be the inside props, and we will assign that with props. So here we have distributed these classes into this classes property here, and other properties outside these classes will be the inside props. Instead of doing this inside the component here, I will just do that inside this function parameter list here itself. So classes, and rest of them will be the inside props. Okay. Now let's apply this class paper into this component here. Class name is equal to classes dot paper. Now let's do the same for the other paper component. Let me copy this, save, back to the application. So here we have added margin and padding for both of these paper components. Now inside this second grid column here, let's render list of post messages. We have already mapped list of post messages with this key property post message list. Often, in order to render such an array of records, we have been using table elements. You can see the same component here, table. For a change inside this application, we will be using list component from Material UI. You can see the detailed documentation here. So first of all, we have to use this component list from Material UI. Now inside this component, we have to have a list item for each item inside the array here. For that, we can use map function from JavaScript. So this is what we do. Props dot post message key can be used, which is mapped to the Redux store property list. From that, we can call this function map with this callback function record and index. From this callback function, we can have this return statement. For each item inside this list component, we can have this component list item, and inside that we can have another component list item text. To display post title, I will be using h5 header. So we can use this typography. Variant is equal to h5. Inside that, we have to show the post title. We can access that from this parameter record. So record dot title, and after that I want to show the post message inside a div like this. So record message. Now after each list item I want to show this horizontal divider. For that we can do this divider, and then I will set this component attribute as li. Now here you can see a red squiggly line because here we have two outer elements, list item and divider. We have to wrap these elements inside another one parent element. In most of these cases we will be wrapping these two elements with an outer div. In VS Code we have a shortcut for that. Select those items to be wrapped, then Ctrl Shift P, then search for wrap with abbreviation, hit enter. If you want to wrap that with div, you can do this, then hit enter. In normal HTML it's not a good practice. For example, if you have an UL element like this, for that direct child element should be li element. Here we are trying to add a div in between this. So in order to avoid this problem, you can use fragment from React. So let's import that here, fragment. Now let's replace this div with fragment. For that you can use this shortcut F2 like we do for rename, fragment. Now we have to do one more thing. When we are trying to render a list of records with map function like this in React, for the outer element there should be a property key with unique value for each element. For that we can use this index property here. So key is equal to index. Without this property you can have errors related to rendering JSX syntax. Back to the application here. Boom, that's it. So here we have the post title and post message. Inside the console window we have been printing this response from get request. So let me remove that from here. Now inside this first grid here we have to design a React form for insert and update operation. That we can do inside this component post message form. So first of all, let's import React hook methods, use effect and use state. In order to work with the form, I'm going to define a component state property like this, values, and set function, set values, and here I will call the function use state. Inside this function we have to initialize this object values. For that I'm going to define another object here, initial field values. Inside that we have two properties, title and then message. Now let's pass this object into this use state function here. Now using this component state property values we can design the form here. For better visibility, let me zoom this editor here. First of all, we need a form control. Into this control I will set this property autocomplete as off, so that we can disable autocomplete or auto suggestion from previous posted data. And in order to avoid default HTML validations, we can add this attribute no validate here. In order to show a text box, we will be using Material UI component here, text field. Basically we can have these three types of text field. Inside this application we will be using this text field here. So back to the application. Now let's create a text field, select this option for auto import, and inside this text field we will be dealing with this property title. So I will set this name property as title. We can set this variant attribute as outlined, and then we will set the label as title. In order to expand this control to the 100% width, I will set this property full width here. Like this we need one more text field, so let me copy this and pasting that here. This is for message, so let me update these properties accordingly. Message back to the application here. So here we have those two text boxes for title and message. For this text component, we don't need this both open tag and close tag, so I will just remove that from here. We only need one tag. Now we want to display values for these controls from this state property values. For that, we can do that here. Value is equal to values.title. We can do the same here for message also. Value is equal to values.message. As you can see, inside this application, both of these controls are stick to each other. In order to avoid that, we have to add a margin in between them. If you check the official documentation here, all of these text field has some margin in between them. If you check the corresponding code here inside the component, material UI class is overwritten with some CSS custom rules. We are going to do the same. We just need to override this class MUI text field -root. You can see the same class if you inspect this control here. So here is the class MUI text field -root. So let's look how to override the corresponding class CSS rules. First of all, like we have done inside the list component, we have to import the class with styles from material UI. With styles. Now outside this component, let's define a property styles. It is a function with single parameter theme. From that function, we just need to return an object. So we can do this. In order to override existing class inside material UI, we can make use of this property root here. If you want to define a new class, we will do that like we have done inside this component here, paper. So let me copy this style from here and let's paste that inside this form component styles. Now in order to access these styles inside this component, we have to call the function here with styles. So with styles, inside that we can pass the styles. Inside the second pair of brackets, we can pass the component post message form here. Now in order to extract these custom classes, we can do this inside the parameter list here, classes, and rest of them will be there inside this property props. Now inside this root property, we are just trying to override this class. We are going to override class inside this text field. So we can set this class root for this parent element form here. So class name is equal to classes.root. Back to the app, that's it. But as per the copied code here, this width is set to 200. We don't need that. So I will just remove this width from here. Let me save this. Back to the app. That's it. We need these controls set to 100% width. Inside this message text box here, we may have to enter paragraphs like this. So multi-line text box will be more appropriate. For that, I will do this. I will add this property multi-line here, and then we can specify number of rows to be shown inside the text field. So rows is equal to 4. So here we have the multi-line text box for message. Now as you can see here, this form is not aligned in center inside this grid column here. So let's do that here. For that, we will be defining a new class form, and we will do this display is equal to flex wrap is equal to wrap, and then justify content as sender. Now let's apply this form class for this form element here. We have already applied this root class here. Now in order to specify one more class for a React element, we have to do this. First of all, we will enclose all of them inside backticks like this. First of all, we have this root class. So we will specify that with this $curly brace syntax. After that, we need the form class. So classes form can be passed here. Let me save this. Back to the app. That's it. Form is aligned in center. Now for these input controls, we have been assigning values from this object values like we have done here. Whenever we change values inside these controls, we have to update that inside these properties title and message inside this object values here. For that, we have to add this event on change here. This event will be handled inside a function handle input change. Now let's fire up this same event for this message text box also. Now let's define the function here. Constant handle input change is equal to, it's a function with single parameter e, which is the default event parameter for any event. Inside this function, first of all, I will retrieve the input control name and value. For that, we can do this constant. We will be using the destructive syntax from JavaScript. So name and value property should be retrieved from the input control, and input control can be accessed like this e.target. So inside this name we will have title or message, and inside this value variable we will have the updated values. Now we have to assign the updated value into this values object. For that, we can make use of this function set values. So set values, inside the function we just need to pass an object like this with the updated values. So we can do this, name is equal to value. So here we are just trying to update the property title or message based on the input control from which this event is triggered, and rest of the properties should be there as it is without any change. So we have to do this value. So here we have defined a general function to update the state properties when input control values is changed. Now, one of the main benefit of using React hooks over class-based component is code reusability. This state component property values and this function handle input change can be reused in any component which design React forms. As per the app structure, we will be defining a component use form to handle common form operations. So let's create that here. Use form.js. First of all, let me copy this import statement from here and I will paste that here. Now let's define a component with this template sfc use form. For now there is no parameter for this function, we can add later. Now into this component we can copy all of these codes here. Let me call this use form function inside this form component here. First of all, we have to add the import statement from use form. Now we will call this function here use form. In order to initialize these values here, we need this initial field values. So I will pass this initial field values into this function initial field values. So let's add the corresponding parameter to this function initial field values. Now from this function we can return all of the reusable parts. So first of all, values, and then set values, and then we need the function handle input change. So we have returned all of these, and we can access that inside this form component using the destructive syntax like this. First of all, we have values, then set values, and then handle input change. So this form should be working as expected. That's it. Okay. So this is how we can reuse codes inside React components using React hooks. Now let's add a submit button inside the form here. For that, we can use this material UI component button. Now let's add corresponding attributes. Variant is equal to contained, and then color is equal to primary. By default, it will have a bluish color. In order to enlarge this button, we can set this attribute size as large. Type of this button will be submit, and button text will be submit. I want to increase this button width, so I will do that inside the CSS here. Let me add a new class, post button, and here I will set the width to 50%. Class name, classes, post button, back to the app. That's it. Now let's wire up a submit event for the form. On submit is equal to, we will call this function handle submit. Now let's define this function here. It's a function with single parameter e. Inside this function, for now we will just print the values object. Inside that we have values from input controls for title and message. So let's print that here. In order to prevent default behavior of an HTML form like reloading of the page, we can call this function prevent default. Let me save this, back to the app, keep this console opened. Now let me enter some random text here. Oh no, here we have another error. It should be there inside the event handle input change. So here we have the problem. While updating the property, we also have to keep existing properties inside the values object. For that, we just need to do this, values. Now let me save this, back to the app. Let's do the same. Now submit the form. That's it. The values object is printed inside this console here. Now let's look how to apply validation inside the form. In this form here, both title and message is mandatory. First of all, inside this form component, I will define a function validate. Inside that we will have the rules for validation. So here is the function validate. For now this function has no parameter. Before defining this function, we also need a component state property like values in order to save error messages. So I will do this, errors, and then set errors, and we can call the function use state here. Inside the function we just need to initialize this object errors. In order to initialize this object, I will just pass an empty object here. Now let's return this errors here and with the function set errors. Now we can access that inside this form component here, errors and set errors. Now inside this function I will define a property temp and I will initialize that with errors object that we have received here. So that we can do this, we will use this separator and errors. Now we can do this, temp dot title is equal to values. Here we are just comparing the values for the title inside this object. If it is empty, we are saying this field is required. So values dot title, if there is a value, error message will be empty. Otherwise error message will be this field is required. Now we have to do the same for message. So let me copy this and pasting below. Now let's update title to message. Finally, from this function we just need to return a boolean value saying whether this form as a whole is valid or not. For that we can do this return. We just need to iterate through this object values temp. So object dot values function can be called. Inside that we can pass temp, and then from this return collection of values we will call this every function. Inside that we will have this condition x such that x is equal to empty. So this condition will be checked for all of the values inside this object temp. If it is empty for all of the properties, then we can say that this form as a whole is valid. Now we can call this function inside this handle submit. Let me remove this console log. If validation is successful, we will just show this alert message. So we can call that from this global object window dot alert validation succeeded. Back to the app. If you submit this, we don't have any alert. Let's populate both of these controls and then submit. So here we have the alert validation succeeded. If you empty any of them, then submit, validation is not succeeded. That is why we are not getting any alert message. Now let's look how to show validation error messages along with corresponding controls. In Material UI, in order to show validation error messages, we have to do this. First of all, inside this text field, we have to set this property error as true. And in order to show the error messages, we can use this attribute helper text. We have to apply these attributes conditionally based on whether there is a value inside this error message for title. For that, we can do this. First of all, we will check whether we have an error message related to title. So errors.title. If there is an error message, we will return this object. Inside that, we will set this property error as true, and then inside this helper text, we can pass the error message errors.title. Now let me copy this same and pasting for this message control here. Instead of title, we have message. Let me save this. Back to the app. Now let me submit this form here. There is something went wrong because it should show all of the error messages for these title and messages. So let's check that here. Inside this validate function, we have saved all of the error messages. Yes, we forgot to update this temp error messages into this errors state property here. So let's do that here. Set errors. Inside that, we can pass this object with updated error messages temp. Let me save this. Back to the app, submit the form. So here we have the error messages for both of the controls. Let's populate this title. Let's populate this message also. Submit the form. So validation is succeeded. So this is how we can implement form validation in React forms. Now let's look how to insert a post with title and message when we submit this form here. For that, first of all, we have to add corresponding action creator and reducer inside these files here. So first of all, let me add the action creator for create operation. So export constant create. It will be a function with two parameters, data. As a second parameter, we will have a callback function on success. It will be called after the successful insert operation. And then here we have the inner function parameter dispatch. Sorry, this is constant. So first of all, we have to make the post request for create operation, which is mentioned inside this API file here. So let's call this create function. API dot post messages function can be called. Inside that, we have this create function. Into that, we just need to pass this data. Sorry, it is data, not date. And then here we have the success function. Then in case of error response, I will copy this catch from here. Inside this success function, we will have a callback function with response. And here we can call the dispatch function. So I will copy this from here. And we have to make a create operation. So action types dot create. Inside this response dot data, we will have the newly inserted object with the new primary key underscore ID. So this is for the create operation. Now let's do the corresponding reducer inside this file here. We just need to add this case for create operation. So case action types dot create will just return an object here. Inside that, we have to add newly inserted object. So first of all, we will keep existing data as it is, and then we have to update this list. Inside that, currently we have these items, so let's keep that as it is. State dot list, And then let's insert the new object that can be accessed from this payload property here. So action.payload. So let's define action creators and reducer for both update and delete operations so that we can avoid coming back to these files later. So first of all, let's define the function for update operation. For that, I will just copy this here. This is for update operation. Inside this create function here, we forgot to call this onSuccess callback. We will be passing this function definition from our component. For this update operation, we also have to pass the ID for that corresponding record which is to be updated. For update operation, we have to make this put request here. Okay, so instead of create, we have to make this put request. Into that, we have to pass both ID and data, and from that we will make this dispatch with update. Inside this response.data, we will have the updated object. And finally, let's call the success callback on success. Now let's define the function for delete operation. For that, I will just duplicate this function for update. Now let's define the delete function here. Actually, we can't use delete here because it is already an existing keyword in JavaScript. So I will just capitalize this first letter here. For update operation, we just need the ID parameter, and we have to call this function delete. We have to call delete function. Into that, we just need ID parameter. Type of operation will be delete, and inside this payload we just need to pass the ID. So that's all about the action creators. Now let's define corresponding reducers here. First of all, we have update operation. So action types dot update, return an object. Existing properties should be there as it is. We have to update this list here. So I will just call the map function from the array. So state.list.map function can be called. Inside that, we have this callback function with x. If x._id is equal to action.payload._id, we have to return the updated object. So which is the inside this payload action.payload. Otherwise, we will return the record as it is. Now we have the delete operation. So case action types dot delete, return an object here. Let's keep existing properties as it is. We just need to remove the item with given ID. So list is equal to state.list, that we can call this filter function, and here is the condition x such that _id, if it is not equal to action.payload, we can keep that inside this array, otherwise that particular item will be removed. So here we will just skip that particular item. So here we have defined action creators and reducers for CRUD operations: insert, update, delete, and retrieve. Now first of all, we have to call this action creator create inside this form component here inside the handle submit. We will invoke the function only when this form is valid. So we can call that inside this if statement here. Before that, we have to map that particular action creator create into this component here. So first of all, let's add the corresponding function connect from React Redux connect. Now let's call the function here connect. Inside this function, we have to map both action creators and properties saved inside Redux store. And inside this second para, we can pass this with stars here. We have done the same inside this list component here. So let me copy that from here. We need the same mapping for state to props, and for action creators, we don't need this fetch all function here. Instead, we need create function. Actually, we have to import that like we have done here. So I will map this action creators into this key create post message. We will be doing update operation inside the same component. So let's map the corresponding action creator here. Update post message actions dot update. Now let's pass both of them here. Map state to props, map action to props. Now let's call this create post message here. Props dot create post message. Into this function we just need to pass this data and callback function for success. So we can pass the data from values like this, and we have to pass the callback for success function. For that I will define a function here, constant on success is equal to, it is a function without any parameter. Inside that we can just show this alert message here, submitted successfully. Now let's pass that function here on success. Now let's try to insert a new record. For that I'm gonna copy a random para from here. So here is the title, here is the message, submit the record, boom. So here we have the success message, submitted successfully. Click on OK. At the same time you can see the newly inserted object here. You can see the same inside this Mongo collection here. Just refresh this collection here. That's it. Now let's look how to replace the success alert with a beautiful toast message or notification. For that we will be using npm package butter toast. First of all we have to install the corresponding package into the application here. So npm I for install, S for save, butter toast. Now here we have installed the package. Now let's look how to integrate that into the application here. First of all, inside app.js we have to add butter toast component. So first of all let's import that here. From butter toast we have to import butter toast. In order to position them we have to import these also, post center, post bottom. Now let's add this butter toast into this component here, butter toast. For proper position we can do this. Position is equal to, we will pass an object vertical post underscore bottom, and horizontal is equal to post center. You can see the proper documentation from corresponding npm package documentation here. Now inside the form component here, let's show a toast message like this. So here is the import statement. From butter toast we have to import butter toast. We also need to import this cinnamon. Now inside this onSuccess function, let's replace this alert with the package toast. We just need to do this butter toast. From that call this raise function. Into that we can pass an object like this, and we will pass the content here, cinnamon, and we can access this crisp, and we can provide the title for the toast here, post box, and we can pass the content here, submitted successfully. Now let's select a style from the package. For that we can use this scheme attribute, cinnamon dot crisp dot scheme purple. In order to show an icon with those toast messages, we can do this icon. Since we have installed material icons into this application, we can make use of that here. First of all, let's import corresponding icon. From material UI icons, we have to import this icon, assignment turned in. Now let's pass the same here, assignment turned in. We can check how this notification looks once we implement update operation. So let's look how to implement update operation inside the app. For that, we will be adding an edit button for all of these post messages inside the list here. So back to the list component. So inside this list item, I will be showing the button inside this div here. So here is the button. Variant is equal to contained, and then color is equal to primary, and size is equal to small. And inside this button, we will show this text edit. Later in this tutorial, we may also need a button for delete operation. So let me copy this and pasting here for delete operation, delete. For this button, I will set the color as secondary. Let's separate these buttons with some margin. So I will do that with a new class, SM margin is equal to margin theme dot spacing 1. Now let's assign that class for these buttons here. Class name is equal to classes dot SM margin. Now let's add the same for this delete button here. We also need to align this button in center. So I will define another class here, action div text align center. Now let's apply that class for this div here. Class name is equal to classes dot action div. So here we go. Now when we click on this edit button here, we have to populate these item details inside this form here, and then from there we can update the details. So let's look how to display this list item record inside this form here. For that, inside this list component, let me define a state property, constant current ID, and set current ID. I will initialize that with function called use state. Initially its value will be 0. So inside this property current ID, we will be keeping that particular record ID. Now we can update this current ID when we click on this edit icon here, on click, and we can directly call the function set current ID here. Into this function, we just need to pass the record ID. It can be passed from this record property, record dot underscore ID. Since we have a parameter for this function set current ID, we can't directly call the function here. Instead, we have to call that inside another function like this. This is a function without any parameter, and we just need to call the function here. Now into this child component post message form, we are passing these property and its set function like this. Current ID and set current ID. So here we just pass current ID with the set function into this form component. From this form component, we can access that from props of the component here. So this is what happens. When we click on this edit button here, this record ID will be stored into this component state property current ID here. Okay? And we have shared that property into this form component here. Inside this form component, based on the value of current ID, we have to populate that inside this form here. So in order to identify whether we have changed value of current ID from parent component list here, we have to use the function useEffect like we have mentioned before. So useEffect function can be called. Inside that we have this callback function. As a second parameter, we have the current ID that is shared from the list component. props.current ID. So whenever value of this property changes inside the list component, this callback function will be invoked. So inside this function, we can do this. First of all, we will check whether this current ID is 0 or not. If it is not equal to 0, we will populate the form here. So we can call this set values function here. So with this function call, we are trying to update the values inside these values here, and thereby form controls will be populated with corresponding record details. First of all, we have the list inside the key post message list, and from that we have to find the corresponding record using this find function x such that underscore id is equal to props.current id. So this function will find that particular record with given id, and it will be updated to this values object here. Now let's try this edit button. Boom. Corresponding record details will be populated inside the form here. Now after making required changes inside these form controls, we just need to submit this record. But we have already implemented insert operation inside the form submit event here. In order to identify whether we have an insert or update operation, we can check current ID. If props.current ID is equal to 0, initially its value will be 0 as we have mentioned here, 0. If it is equal to 0, we will go for insert operation. Otherwise, we will update the record here. For that, we just need to call this mapped function update post message. Props.update post message. Into this action creator, we have to pass ID data on success callback. So props.current ID, and then values can be passed here and the on success callback. Now let's look whether this operation works and how this notification looks like. Let me try to update this first record here. I will just append asterisk marks to this title at the end, and I will add the same to the starting for this message text box here. Let me submit this. Sorry, here we have an error message. Post message dot put is not a function. Looks like something went wrong inside the action creator here. So post message dot put function is called. So inside api.js we have update function. Instead of that, we have called put function here. Now back to the app. Let's do the same. Add few asterisk marks here and here. Submit the record. So here we have the toast message with title post box and the message submitted successfully. We can see the updated details here. We have added few asterisk marks here and here. I want to show this toast message at the bottom. That we can configure inside app.js butter toast component here. Actually, we have mentioned that inside app.js here, vertically it should be there in bottom. Actually, here we have a typo with bottom instead of these positions. Now I have changed my mind. I will change this position, post top, post right. Vertically it should be there in top. In horizontal it should be there in right. Now let's try that again. Let me remove these asterisk marks from here. That's it. Now after any of these operations, insert and update, we have to reset this form. Actually, we can add that inside this common code inside use form. So let's define the function here. So constant reset form. For this function, we don't have any parameter. First of all, we have to reset this values object here. So set values function can be called. Into that we can pass this initial field values, and then we have to reset this errors object, set errors. Into that we can pass this empty object, and finally we have to reset this current ID that is shared from this post message. If we keep this naming pattern, we can do that inside this reset form. For that, from this form component, we will pass the corresponding set function from props. So props.set current ID can be passed here. We have shared that from this list component here, set current ID, and from this form component we have sent that to this use form here. Now let's access that here, set current ID. Now we can reset the current ID here, set current ID with 0. Now let's return this reset form function here. Now let's access that here, reset form. Now we can call this function inside this onSuccess function here. Inside this reset form function, we have updated values, errors, and current ID to its initial values. Actually, we have to do this reset operation for errors object inside this useEffect callback here. When there is a change for current ID, we have populated that particular record into the form. At the same time, we have to reset existing errors. So we can do this. Set errors function can be called here. Into that, we can pass this empty object. Let's look whether the reset operation is working or not. Let's try to update this record, submit the record. That's it. Here we have reset the form controls to its initial values. Now let's look how to implement delete operation. For that, first of all, we have to add onClick event for the delete button inside this list component here. OnClick. Inside that, we can call this function onDelete. Into that, we will pass the ID like we have done here. So let me copy this. Now let's define this onDelete function here. Constant onDelete. So here is the function body. Since delete is a loss of data, first of all, we have to confirm the operation. So I will do this. Window.confirm function can be called. Inside that, we can ask this question: are you sure to delete this record? If user confirm this operation, we can go for the delete operation. For that, we have to call this delete action creator here. I think we have not yet mapped that action creator here. So let's do that here. Delete post message actions dot delete. Now let's call that here props dot delete post message. Into this function, we have to pass corresponding ID and the onSuccess callback. Sorry, for this function, we have passed ID from here. So let me rename this parameter to ID and we can pass that here. Now as a callback function, we have to pass onSuccess function like we have done inside this onSubmit event here. So I will just copy this function from here and pasting here. We don't need this reset form function, so let me remove that. Now let's add corresponding import statement for this butter toast. So let me copy these two import statements from here and let's paste that here. Now let's pass this onSuccess function here. OnSuccess. Inside this notification, I want to change this content into deleted successfully. Deleted successfully. Instead of this icon here, I want to use a delete icon. So I will import this icon delete sweep and let's pass that here. Delete sweep. Let's save this and back to the app. Let's try to delete this second item from the list and confirm this operation. Boom. So here we have the notification for the operation and here we have removed that particular item from this list. You can download this project source code from the GitHub link given below in video description. So that's it guys. In this MERN Stack beginners tutorial, we have implemented CRUD operations with React and Node.js. If you found this video really helpful, please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues. Please consider subscribing to this channel CodAffection if you haven't already. So that's it guys. Bye. Happy coding.